And so, with that rather over-the-top introduction, I'd like to welcome you to the 2012 layout update. I'll be doing this a little bit differently than my initial 2011 layout tour. I'll be doing a voiceover over video, so that way I can do a better job of thinking instead of worrying about thinking and videotaping at the same time. So you're looking at my layout, primarily some of the sections I updated in the past year, and I'll take you through a few of those changes and some of the things I've done to the layout in that time. Right now you're looking at downtown, and this is where it all started. It was plastic sheeting that I like to use called Sintra with some street markings painted on it. And here's how the buildings looked really at the time of my 2011 layout update, or layout tour I guess I should call it. And of course here's a little bit of a snippet from that video, which is available on my YouTube channel, showing exactly the state of the layout just about a year ago. And as you can see, if you look there right in the front of downtown, you can see some pretty much new as they come from the factory buildings from Kato. And you can see the new section here I'm showing, which was pretty much pink styrofoam at the time and just a single loop of track. All of that's changed significantly. And now we'll switch to a more current view, showing my little trolley and some of the newer structures that have been added and detailed and lit and everything. So let me take you through some of these buildings, as they seem to get a lot of interest from the people who've commented. This first structure we'll look at is a scratch build. I don't really have a fancy name for it. I just kind of call it the modern Flatiron Scratchbuild building, and it is a scratch build structure. I got some photos I'll share with you of the process. There's more detail on my blog if you care to check it out. But essentially this building is built out of clear acrylic sheets, some of that plastic Sintra material, and then some on clear transparency paper I printed out window frames. Those window frames were then glued to the acrylic. Styrene was applied over the top of that. For the interior, I used foam core sheets with some details and some hand printed or some printed out backgrounds. I put it all together, creating my different floors that are going to go on the inside. Add the wiring for lights. For lighting, I like to use these LED strips. You just solder on the leads and voila, you have light. And here's how it looks in its finished state, with the interior details and the laser printed transparency sheets acting as window frames, styrene acting as the different floor separators. I think it turned out pretty well, and it was a lot of experimentation to see if it would work. This next building, it didn't take a whole lot of experimentation. It's a building produced by Kato. It is modified in that it's actually two of them put together to be a much taller building than it originally comes. So as we pan up to the top of the building here, you see my Wayland Futani logo, and here I am cutting off the bottom section of the Kato kit. Cut off the top as well, glue them together, put details on the different floors, add lights, details, pictures, all sorts of fun stuff to try to make it look realistic, and there you go. Another Kato building, this is the Kato 5th Avenue building. It's not so much a Kitbash as is a lot of reworking and reimagining what it should look like. I really like the looks of this building. The rounded corner is pretty unique, cool, and modern, so I added some advertising signs and lights and everything. Here's kind of how it looked after my initial prep work. I painted both the inside and outside to give it a nice solid coat to remove some of the opacity of the plastic when I have lights on the interior. Here you see me running some small SMD lights on the exterior for lighting the signage, wiring up the different floors to get the LEDs to work on the interior of the building. And what it kind of looks like, it's just a mess of wiring. I'm not the neatest electrician out there, but the proof is in the pudding, as they say, whatever that term means. And as you can see here, I got a lot of lights into places that probably weren't meant for it, but I think it turned out pretty well. It took a lot of effort, but again, sometimes the payoff is worth all that extra effort. So that's the 5th Avenue building, a couple of my Kato scratch builds. Something that's not a building are the terminal grounds for my tram station, or trolley station, depending on what you want to call it. It is sort of a focal point, and I've avoided actually working on it for a long time. It's still not done. You see as the tram pulls up here and reverses out, I've got some sidewalk area, and we're panning over now from the main intersection by the church and that plaza there over to the tracks, and essentially I created this sidewalk using a thin sheet of styrene painted with a camouflage gray color, and then for the actual sidewalk contours, that's just a pencil, and I just did it with a pencil and I got this tip online from another friend, and frankly, pencil works pretty good. It's not too dark, it's just light enough that it gives the illusion of being realistic. Lots of little details I just kind of threw on there. One of the things I'm proud of I've also done is I've added a lot of graffiti. I'm not a big fan of graffiti in real life, but it really does help bring a little extra element of realism to the layout for a model. Well, as our tram rolls downtown, we'll stop off at one of my other structures that I've built or put together, at least in the past year. And it's this building. It's the Kibri Bahnhof Kehl Kitbash. This structure was, I love the looks of this building. This is actually an older Kibri kit, or Kibri kit. I'm not really sure how to say that precisely. Here it is. It's the Kibri N7402, and it's apparently a model of the train station in Kehl, or Kiel, Germany. And I had one that was already pre-assembled that I had to tear apart and break down to salvage it from its previous construction. And I had this unbuilt kit here as well that I was able to use those parts. So combined, I had a lot of parts, or at least 2 full kits to work with to make this a taller structure. And there you go, you can see my different pieces to make it a taller structure than it was originally intended to be. Here's about half the building. Easy to work on that way, adding in the plastic for the windows, the detail for the bottom level store. Now the bottom level store, I had a lot of fun with this one. It's foam core. Grabbed a lot of different images of store shelving from the internet and glued those images onto the foam core strips to create those interior shelving, which turned out pretty good. Of course, I labeled it as a Blokker store, which Blokker is a chain of stores in the Netherlands, which is, I think, obscure and interesting enough that it sort of fits on the layout. And right now you're looking at the sign for probably longer than I should have left it on there. Now, we're going to talk about the big building. This is the Skynet office tower, and it's basically 3 Tomytec high-rise structures, painted black with lighting added, and a rooftop logo added for the Skynet Corporation. You might have to Google Skynet to figure out what their significance is, but they're a very interesting company. I do have a video that goes into extensive detail on how I built this one, particularly on the lighting aspects. So if you're interested in some of the lighting techniques, do check out the other video I have posted specifically on the Skynet Tower. One of the fun things to add to the layout and one of the fun projects to build was the Smit Rotterdam and the harbor section. Now this Smit Rotterdam is it's a pretty cool ship in real life. And it was fun. I didn't know anything about the ship, but I got this kit. It's from Heller in France. It's a 1/200 scale, so it's pretty close to 1/160. There's not very many modern ships in 1/160. So I got this Heller Smit Rotterdam kit and researched it a little bit and found out it's quite an interesting little boat. And I think it looks pretty good on the layout. Of course, I repainted it. Well, you have to paint it because it comes in a nasty looking plastic color. Added interior lights and some basic weathering and so forth to give it a little bit more of a realistic look. It was a lot of fun and a little bit of a challenge as well, but I think it's a good looking boat to have in the harbor. The harbor is all scratch built stuff, again just using what I had handy in terms of plastic and styrene to put it together. Another Kato building, the Kato broadcast building. This one was another sort of, I guess you call it kitbash or modification. I took out a wall. It was a solid wall, the only wall. Well, you're going to see it in a minute. But I took out some of the walls, added more interior lights and details. There we go. This is how it originally looked, and you can see my marks where I'm taking out a wall. And presto, we're going to see the wall's gone. So I had to, the building already comes with floors, so I just had to add a little bit of detail on each floor, score some glass to make it look like the stock window so it matched, and came up with this new structure. Moving further down the layout, we come across a Tomytec Showa office building. This is 2 Tomytec Showa office buildings, and this one's a little bit funny. It's actually, the ground floor business is actually a photo I took in Paris of a real business, and manipulated the signage to create the signage for my little restaurant at the bottom floor of this Japanese structure. So that was kind of cool. It was a little bit of a hassle actually getting this one to have, because the the windows are all solid plastic. There's no glass there, so I had to cut out the black plastic and then add in my own window frames. You can see here in this photo how you're basically cutting through the plastic, and then I had to go through with small pieces of styrene to try to replace the frames I had to cut out. It was a big hassle. Again, it's one of those projects that kind of captivates your imagination and you just keep working on it. Moving a little bit further, I guess south on the layout, we reach the negative zone. And I call it the negative zone. Well, I don't really call it the negative zone. I just decided to call it the negative zone for this video. But there's basically a big spot here that I've done nothing with and haven't yet decided what to do about. It's got a mill. It's got a building sitting there that really doesn't belong there. But I got a lot of open space here. And I think if you look at my city and look at the rest of my layout, open space is at a premium. There's a refinery there with a little siding, which I seldom use and probably don't appreciate too much. So I try to figure out, what do I do with that area? I've thought of putting in a carnival, put in some of those neat little in-scale rides, or I can just fill in this whole area and add more skyscrapers. So I realized I didn't want everything to be a cityscape or urban background, so part of my 4th version expansion includes this countryside and Le Petit Gare. I'm not saying that correctly, but it basically means the small station out in the countryside. It's a model of a French station, and we've got a couple of cars packed there, some roadway parked there, and some trees and scenery have been finished along here. So you can just kind of fly along the roadway, which loops around this hill, goes down through this bridge, which is a Bush paper model, and then over to this little section, which I added on just as a little point of interest, just a small little village someday. It's not finished. And again, we're just flying through some of the scenery work just to show that it's not all skyscrapers in Quinntopia. I don't know why those tanks are there. They probably just needed to be there. And really, when you find a tank parked somewhere, it's not a good idea to go tell them to move. Okay, moving over to some of the more new sections, the version 4 section of the layout. The retaining wall, these are knock retaining walls. I love these things. These are really a lot of fun to work with. Added graffiti, weathering with weathering powders, and a little bit of lichen applied with, or just really green flocking and with white glue, gave that kind of ivy grown up the side look. A couple of scratch built buildings for the background here I created. They were fun. It's kind of fun to create buildings that are just essentially facades, but a little bit more depth to it, so it gives the sense that you're looking at a real building, not just a front. This one I call the banal apartments because it looks banal. It's pretty boring. And it's again using a transparency sheet printed with window frames. Applied on the top of that, I put styrene. And put that on a piece of clear acrylic. And then you add your other pieces to give it a full look, like a real wall would look. Now the building next to it, I call it the 908 building, only because if you look closely you'll see it has the numbers 908 on the bottom. Similar idea, pretty similar in execution, but went for a little bit different look. Well, now you're looking at the big project. Really the past 6 to 8 months has been this project, which is the terminal. We'll start with the terminal platforms, which begin here and run all the way down to my terminal station. These again were scratch built because really the price of commercial platforms is pretty pricey. So I took styrene, again one of my favorite materials, underlaid it with some foam core underneath it to give it a little bit of height and solidity, poked wires through it for lights, and voila, I had terminals. Well, it wasn't quite that easy. The terminal platforms go down to the terminal station obviously, and you can see how they end here with the concourse and I guess the ground level of the station. This took a lot of work, a lot of time to get all this detail done in here, which is basically several different stores, shops, restaurants, and so forth with people, signage, lighting, and so forth. The original idea for my station was actually inspired by a modern style Herpa kit. And from that idea I was really thinking about, yeah, this Herpa kit's cool but too small, I need to make it bigger. Well, then I decided to go a scratch build direction and toyed with different ideas there. And it really wasn't until I came across a photo of the new Berlin Bahnhof that I decided to get really ostentatious and go with the structure I ended up with. Now, before I go into too much detail on the terminal, here's the section it sits above. It's an elevated section that goes across a double track. It used to be single track. Here we get to see the actual parking lot and roadway that leads to the station. And coming into view right here is the new terminal itself, which again sits above this double track line, where you can see the Nankai 50,000 Rapid running underneath. So the station itself, again, is another scratch build, again made out of a similar technique. Transparency printed window frames on acrylic, and then the interiors were foam core and Sintra sections with basic little chunks of foam core to simulate desks. The canopy itself was a little bit of a engineering challenge, but I pulled it together and it seems to be stable. Of course, bringing it all together required some paint, some glue, and a lot of patience, as well as a little bit of electrical skill to get all the lighting and wiring everywhere I needed it to be. And in addition to the station itself, you need some interior details. So here's a couple of shots of some of the interior details. A flunch restaurant. A lot of these details are homemade with foam core and printed shelving details to make it look like you had shelves full of bread, magazines, books, whatever. Frankly, at 1/160, it's hard to tell anyway. But some of these pieces, like the shelves there, are from Lutke Modelbahn, who's a sort of a small little outfit out of Germany. It makes some of these sort of accessories and pieces like bookshelves and end scale, as well as some of the tables from my Flunch restaurant. Looks good, and found a nice place for them in the station. Outside the station, of course, you need some surrounding buildings. And here we have another series of what I call background buildings or facades. The first one you see there, that Mealy kit, is actually constructed, or deconstructed I should say, from an old Arnold Universal building kit that I took apart, repainted, and built into that. You are looking right there at an old Model Power kit, or Polo building kit, and these last three here are Artitec facades from an outfit, again, in Germany. And that first one there is actually two of them, again, doubled up to make it extra tall. They're lit and detailed, of course, as is my sort of habit. I think they turned out pretty good. The Model Power kit, I created that cafe through masking tape on acrylic, and then spray painted over it, removed the masking tape to get those window frames. And there, of course, is the station, and giving you another shot of some of the other things I did on the interior. You have the destination sign, and now we're going back to the facade. Sorry about that. So yeah, here we go. We got the hotel, and you got some sort of church or temple or some sort of structure, and then down further you have more of a retail store. And right there in the distance you can see the end of what I call the Martel Warehouse, which is actually a Walther's hardware furniture company store that I took those parts and kitbashed into a longer building to sit behind the platform. And I removed the canopy here so you can see a little bit more into the station itself. But you can see some of the details looking through down to the platforms itself. But it seems to me that as nice as train stations are, they always seem to be in the seedier neighborhoods. Even with E3 Shinkansens running by and there's graffiti on the walls, you're going to find rundown warehouses near your train station. So that's what I needed here, is kind of a backdrop to all the platforms. The Martel Warehouse. And my main goal here was to make it look weathered, semi-abandoned and dirty, and almost like an eyesore for passengers getting off at the terminal would be really disappointed at where they've arrived because they see this nasty looking old warehouse. Of course, now I'm showing you behind the building and my attempts at creating a decent facade back there. And here we come out to the parking lot and the front of the station. It's a little bit random what I'm doing here, but hopefully you're getting a sense of what I tried to create, and hopefully it's been a little bit enjoyable.